Hi, I'm Matt with Supernatural History TV, and if you're anything like me, you've been absolutely bombarded with the debate between Wes Huff and Billy Carson. And that interview was quite shocking, especially in a part of Billy Carson. And it's made me think, well, what are some of the other things that he said? Are they the same? Are they similar? And I've actually found an interview from several months ago with the Valuetainmnet podcast. And I thought it'd be fun to look through it and react to it. So let's get to it.
So what do you think about the Bible?
Well, the Bible has a lot of good information in it. If you can apply some of the information, it can really change your life. It can really put you on the right path. But it also has some information in there that's detrimental to people as well. You have to have discernment with what you're reading in the book, in the Bible. In the Bible, where you see the word God everywhere, that's a mistranslation by accident on purpose.
So where you see God is a mistranslation. That's interesting. I wonder what he's going to go from here.
The original word is gods with an S. It's always with an S. When you back engineer the actual word, the translations, you find out it's gods, not God singular.
So kinda, right? So it's kinda like this. So in the Bible, when they refer to God, it's usually in a number of different ways, but the most common way is Elohim. And Elohim is the plural generally for gods, right? So it is the plural for gods. However, and people, I mean, you don't have to be a linguist. People much smarter than me, like Dr. Michael Heiser, talk about how, looking at basic sentence structure, the basic subject structure, you can see that it is very clearly used in the singular. And when looking at, the word Elohim itself, you got to think of it like this. You are an ancient person, and there is already a singular word for God, and that is El. And El is the singular word for God. And everybody's familiar with this. If you ever look at the angels, for instance, like Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Raphael, and that's usually with their names in reference to God in the singular. But think about it, you're an ancient person. You have a God, and you don't want that God to be confused with a very well-known God of that area, with that area being Canaan. And ancient Canaan has its own pantheon of gods. Now, the ancient Israelites are not native to Canaan, right? They went there after Abraham left what they call Ur-Kasdim or Ur the Chaldeans. So when Abraham left Ur-Kasdim, which most people believe it's Ur, the ancient city in Samaria, where it's one of the first civilizations, or somewhere just south of Turkey. Either way, it's within Mesopotamia. So it's within the Mesopotamian sphere of influence. You have these people, they've come from a foreign land to Canaan. Now, the Canaanite pantheon is massive, right? They've got El, they've got Baal, they've got, Mot, they've got Resheph, they've got, a huge pantheon of gods, kind of like the Greek gods. And their supreme God, the God of the heavens, his name is El. And his son, the God or king of the earth, is Baal. Now, El and Baal are both generic words, also meaning a specific person. So the generic word for God is El, but it's also the name of a very specific and well-known God, the God of the universe in Canaanite pantheon. Same with Baal. Baal means Lord. So what you find in the Bible is that ancient Jews purposefully changed the wording because it would have made sense to say, well, El is God. Well, okay, well, you're going to confuse people. Or you're going to say the Lord God. Well, that's also going to confuse people. Well, you're not going to say, the Lord Baal, right? Or which is, Baal, the Canaanite deity. So what the ancient Hebrews did is that they used generic terms of the words to distinguish the God of Israel from these other gods. And this makes sense from a person or people point of view. When looking at just the human thought and the human condition, how do I separate this Canaanite God, El, from my God who is different? And well, just call him something different. So they used Elohim, the plural for God. So gods. And the same thing, instead of calling him Lord, which would make sense to call him Baal, they called him Adonai, which is a combination of words. So this off the bat doesn't really make a lot of sense, because you have to ignore the human aspect of it and why these people are doing these things, and you're ignoring the structure and the sentencing of people much smarter than me who can probably tell you all about it. I recommend Dr. Michael Heiser.
Elohim is also a plural term. It's not a singular term. And you also discover that Yahweh is actually Enlil from the Sumerian cuneiform pantheon.
No. This is very, very easily falsifiable, right? Let's go back again to Abraham. Abraham probably came, which is what most, archaeologists and biblical scholars think it is, oldest city in the world. Ur and Uruk, the two of them. So Ur-Kasdim, or Ur, one of the oldest cities in the world. And when you look at where Ur is located, that is the heart of Sumer. So when you look at the story of Abraham is the patriarch of the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic peoples. And why he is the patriarch is because, and there's a story to this, but it doesn't really matter, but the reason why he's the patriarch is because he rejected these gods. He basically, and this is an apocryphal text, he basically broke an idol, and he waited for the gods to strike him down, and nothing happened. So he broke a bunch more idols, and he waited for the gods to strike him down, and again, it didn't happen. So he said, well, I choose to reject these gods, and I worship the God who created all things. And that's the apocryphal text of it. But the biblical text is within the same vein and is very similar, where we see Abraham expressly rejecting the gods of his father, Terah, the idol maker, in favor for the God who created all things. Well, if Ur is a Sumerian city, then he's expressly rejecting the Sumerian gods. So it makes no sense to say that Yahweh, which, I mean, I don't even know how he's getting that. I'm going to be honest with you. Yahweh has specific meanings. And you can look those up yourself. I will probably show you on the screen here. It doesn't make sense to say that God is Enlil, because we have in Abraham an express rejection of those gods. So it doesn't make logical sense, and it doesn't make biblical sense to say that. And let's continue.
Theon from the Sumerian cuneiform text. He's Enlil. It becomes Yahweh in the biblical text. Where does
it say that, though? I mean, we have in the Bible an express rejection of the Enlil and the Sumerian gods. So I'm confused here. I don't know where he's getting this from. If someone can explain it to me, I'd be grateful. But I don't understand how he's getting this.
All these correlations between the different ancient characters from the Sumerian text end up in the biblical text. And you find out in the book of Deuteronomy that these gods are fighting each other over resources and people.
So yes and no. There is references to other gods in the Bible. Psalm 82 is a good example of that. But in every single one of these instances where they're talking about other gods, it is the God of Israel that is commanding the other gods to do his bidding. He talks to Mot, he talks to Resheph, he talks to Deber. These are all not Sumerian gods, Canaanite gods. And when he's commanding these gods, he often mocks them and He is the God that controls these gods. And this concept isn't, foreign to Christians or to people. Many of the demons in Christianity are ancient Canaanite gods. The same thing with Beelzebub. Baal-zebub, the Lord of Flies. He is another prince of demons. But in actuality, he is a small, local, minor Canaanite god, one that's well known by that time, especially in the time of Jesus, where they even make direct mention of Beelzebub when referring to Jesus.
And he's saying, there's one person in this city that doesn't like me. I want you guys to go over there. Now, keep in mind, they've never met these people. Kill the women, kill the children, kill their animals, and bring the spoils of war back to me. Now,
When he did that with the giants, read Genesis, right? It was one of the main reasons of the flood. So if you read Genesis, it says that there were giants in those times. And they basically went around because the sons of God came down to the daughters of man, married them, and had their children, the giants. And God could not let that happen. So he sent the flood to destroy the giants. This is a big topic in the book of Enoch, where not only were the giants, destined to destroy themselves, they also became the evil spirits of the earth. But that's a story for another time. But when you have the giants, they are to be destroyed. And here's the thing, the giants, which are the Nephilim, survive, right? They survive in the Bible. And they survive in Canaan. So in the Bible, they've got mentioned that the Nephilim survived. And God commands the ancient Jews to destroy them because he missed them when there was the flood. Or somehow they survived. Or, there are plenty of stories, but they survived. And so when you're talking about the destruction of these people, yes, in many ways they were commanded to be destroyed, but some of them were descendant of the Nephilim. So they were already predetermined to be destroyed. So it doesn't quite make a lot of sense on why he would say that. He's entitled to his opinion. He may think that God would never do this, and that's perfectly reasonable. It's perfectly fine. But it's my thought process that, well, he's done this in the past. It's in the very first book of the Bible. It makes sense that he's going to continue to do it.
Now, you're saying to yourself, the creator of the universe, has all power, all knowing, omnipotent, omniscient. Why in the world would he write stuff like that or give a man the ability to write stuff like that to put in his book? In some cases, it's not talking about the creator of the universe. We have to be able to discern that. We have to be able to have the eye to see that some of this is manipulation for the power of people to put on top of other people.
Sure, but
in the New Testament, Jesus says, honor your slave master. Now, why would we want to honor a slave master? As you would honor me, he says. Do you think Jesus really would say something like that? I don't. I think that his message was pure and clean and clear, and that he was trying to usher back a level of Christ consciousness back in humanity. And that's the return. The second return is when we all reach a level of Christ.
The second return is when we reach Christ's consciousness. So that's a interesting way of looking at it. There are some agnostic, texts that kind of make reference to this. And I don't know if he's going to bring it up, but there are some, such as the Ebionites. The Ebionites were an ancient Christian sect, one of the earliest Christian sects. And what they believed was that Jesus was born a man, but because of his righteousness and his perfectness while being on the earth, that he reached a sort of divinity and became divine. And that if people were to follow in his footsteps, that they too, not going to be as divine as Jesus, but they too can reach a certain level of divinity. But in that case, there isn't, I don't know where he's getting that Jesus won't come again in this respect. I'm having a hard time putting it. Maybe you guys can tell me in the comments.
Consciousness. That's when Jesus comes back. He comes back in our minds, not in a physical form. And for people to take his words and screw it around to make it okay for slavery, I think that's a big thing where we see now the injection of human minds, not the creator of the universe.
I don't know when Jesus said that it's okay to be slaves, though. I mean, if you're honoring your slave master, let's say that let's think through this. When you honor your slave master, I think Jesus is referencing as the same way as you would honor Caesar. And that these are earthly things. And in heaven, it doesn't even apply. So he's saying is be good to people just in general. And he picked a somewhat extreme measure, a slave master, Caesar, to really emphasize this point that these are earthly concerns, and what he is concerned about is heavenly concerns or spiritual concerns, and that these things, don't let them bother you or bring you down, because that ties you to the earth. But you must let go of it, and by letting go of it, can you achieve a level of spirituality. So I think that this is closer to what Jesus is saying. I mean, this is just my opinion about it, right? But, you know, everybody's entitled to their opinion and interpret it the way. That's the beauty of having a written work.
So you have to be discerning with the biblical text.
Who is Jesus to you? In your eyes, who is Jesus?
His name is Yeshua, okay? Jesus is, first the J is
correct, Yeshua.
Is a recent letter. The J is not that old.
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
So it really was originally Isus, and that name
Jesus.
Isus means hail Zeus, okay?
No. So this is a misconception. So in Latin, they did not have the word Y or the letter Y. So when they were transcribing the Bible into Latin, they had to change certain words for letters that they did have. So instead of Yeshua, which starts with a Y, they changed it to a word that they did have, or a letter that they did have, J, which sounded similar to what it was. So Yeshua sounds close to Joshua, which would be now Jesus. And this is not the only time that this happened. I'm sure everybody has heard of Jehovah. And Jehovah is a word that is in the Bible, and it's a word that everybody knows about. But Jehovah is not in the original Bible. And that's because, again, they did not have Y. So where it says Jehovah, what it really was Yahweh. So that is just saying, it's not that it's incorrect or wrong. It's just that they just simply didn't have the word for it. So they had to make a new word based off of what they had that sounded like it or was similar enough to it so that they would understand what they were talking about. So Yeshua became Jesus. Yahweh became Jehovah. So, like even today, like in Spanish, Jesus is Jesus. It doesn't mean that everyone in Spanish is worshiping Zeus. So that I don't understand this. It's a false equivalency, right? In the Bible, the word hell is a made-up word. It's a pagan word, and it's from Old German and Old Norse hell, which is the Norse afterlife. If you didn't go to Valhalla, you went to hell, the land of shadow and darkness. And when they were, transcribing the Bible from Latin to Old English, or when it was first being written into Old English, they needed to find a generalized word at the time that people would have known in a general sense. So they used the word hell, which is an Anglicized version of hell. And that comes from the Greek word in the Bible, which is what they use, is Hades. And Hades being the ancient Greek afterlife. And when they're using the word Hades, they don't mean actual Hades. They're just using a general sense, like, hey, this is generally the afterlife of where people go. And we're not saying you actually go to Hades or that the god Hades is the place you go to. No, they're using it generally. So it makes sense why it would sound like Zeus, because you're using a word that people would understand, but it's different enough for them to be able to distinguish, like, oh, hey, I understand this. Because he's making a mistake because it's a very people, you got to look at through the lens of people. You know, people were just as smart back then as they are today, and if not, a little bit smarter when it comes to understanding language, understanding, especially the times that they lived in, much better than someone 2,000 years later. So when they are doing these things, look at it from a people perspective. Try to understand the context of why they're doing this. No, people aren't worshiping Zeus when they say Jesus. That it's just, one, it's just wrong, and two, there's Yeshua. That was his name. It had nothing to do with Zeus. So it's just the Latinized Yeshua.
So you're calling on Zeus when you say Jesus, one of the Sumerian people who converted over to the Greek gods. But
the Sumerian people already collapsed. So Sumer was an ancient civilization. It lasted quite a while. It was one of the first civilizations. But the Sumerians were conquered by the Akkadians, and the Akkadians were conquered by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians, and then the Persians were conquered by the Greeks, Alexander the Great. And then they were then in turn conquered by the Romans, more or less in that generalized biblical Levant area. So this doesn't make, and you have to realize this happened from the dawn of civilization to the time of Jesus. There was this change. So to say the Sumerian people became Greeks or turned to Greece, it's like maybe. I mean, even by the time of what people think of classical antiquity, when it comes to like the War of Troy and the Bronze Age collapse, it's still gonna be the Babylonian / Akkadian periods. So I mean, Sumer has long lost its influence. Sumer has long been replaced. So it's kind of nuts to think. It's kind of to say that. I don't understand. I don't understand. Maybe one of you guys can help explain it to me.
His name is Yeshua, and so Yeshua to me, very powerful person, very spiritual, high level of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Y. There's a Y right here. There's a Y right here. Yeshua. Yeah, there's a Y. So why is he this? Okay.
A student of the Egyptian mysteries. When Jesus disappears from the Bible, he actually ends up in Egypt. Okay, you can find this information in a book that was kept out of the biblical text called the Gospel of the Holy 12. And in the Gospel of the Holy
12. I have no idea what this is. I have tried looking this up. I have tried searching everywhere I could. I've got a lot of old books. I've got a lot of ancient books. I cannot find this anywhere. I have no idea what it is. I have no idea where he found it from. I have found one One reference to it. And that was about God being a vegan in the late, 20th century. So I don't know where he's getting this from. I don't know where this comes from. I cannot find it. If one of you guys can tell me where this is, and I'll read it. I've not read it, but I have no idea where he's getting this information from. But I'm going to assume that there is a book, and I'm going to assume he's being truthful about what this book is saying. And let's just think about it from a logical, from a personable perspective.
12, he shows up in Egypt, and we know that's a fact because I take people on tour every year to Egypt, and I take them to the house that Jesus lived in. It's a crypt. It's actually worship. People come there to see that bed that he laid in every single year. When I take people there, we take them straight there. And we know the path that he traveled throughout Egypt because it's a huge sign outside that Coptic church where he lived that shows where he went. Now, when he was in Egypt, what did he go there for? To learn the Egyptian mysteries. Who taught the Egyptian mysteries? Thoth, the Atlantean priest king, the person I wrote this book about.
Thoth, the Atlantean priest king. Okay.
And so Thoth was the teacher of the Egyptian mysteries, or the ancient mysteries, of what it was called. And then he leaves there and he goes to Tibet to learn Qigong and Reiki healing, which was confirmed by the Dalai Lama. And then he heads down into India.
I've never heard of this before.
To learn the mystic arts, teaching reincarnation all the way back. Then the Bible picks him up at the age of 32. I call my son out of Egypt.
Okay. So let's get the timeline straight. He goes to Egypt where he learns from an Atlantean god king, then goes to India, which is quite a distance on foot through harsh deserts and all that, where he then meets the Dalai Lama and learns about, I'm assuming, Hinduism and Buddhism and all that. And then he somehow makes it back to Egypt, and then God calls him from Egypt. So what's interesting here is that he noticed that there is a departure from where he says that this book is coming from, with the Holy 12 or something like that, right? And notice that he's now saying, well, the Dalai Lama said this. It's just like, okay, well, I doubt the Dalai Lama said it in this book that he has that I can't find. And I doubt that this says it in that he went to India and learned Reiki, and reincarnation, two things that, Jesus isn't really known for, considering that in all of Christianity and in all of Hebrew Judaism, there is a eternal afterlife. There's actually 4 afterlives in the Bible. But all of them, there's 2 temporary places, 2 permanent places, but in the end, they are permanent. The lake of fire, the permanent place for the wicked, and paradise, the permanent place for the righteous. So I don't see where Jesus has ever talked about reincarnation. So I don't know why I don't know where he's getting this from. And raking. That too doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense, because, even look at the story of the centurion, right? The centurion comes to Christ, and through his faith alone, the servant was healed. Jesus didn't touch him. He didn't touch the servant because he was talking to the centurion. And it just doesn't make sense. I don't, even in a number of the apocryphal texts that I've read, I can't think of anything that would be equivalent to this. But let's assume this book is saying this, then okay, so we're assuming this book is saying this. And Jesus went to all these places and then somehow ended back up in Egypt and then was called from Egypt to Israel.
He shows up on the back of a donkey, proclaims himself to be the Messiah. So it's a big story.
I think he's missing a number of years here. Yeah.
I think that he had a big message. I don't think people were able to grasp it at the time. But his message was that not that he was coming back, but that the Christ would return, the Christ consciousness.
Where did you?
The Christ consciousness again. I have. So there's two places that I've heard about there being multiple Christs. One was by a Jewish historian while I was in Israel, and they talked about that a Messiah or Christ is a reference to a savior that has come to save the Jewish people in some way. And in this respect, there are multiple messiahs, but there's only ever going to be the Messiah, like one Messiah that will be the final Messiah that will, save people. And this was just his theory and his opinion based on what he thought. And then there is a historic text that talks about it. And this is in Eusebius, who was an early church father. And basically what he was doing was that he was doing this more or less thought experiment on how can Jesus be king of the Jews? How did he get his authority? Now, Eusebius was the teacher of Roman Emperor Constantine. And, Roman Emperor Constantine was the one that did the Council of Nicaea. And that was really the beginnings of Christianity as we know it, because it was the first time where they said, this body of works, we're not looking at it. We don't consider it canon. I know canon's a big history and a big story for a later day, but that was really the first. And Constantine was known for asking Christians about their beliefs. He was fascinated by Christians and Christian belief, and he'd ask them all sorts of questions. And Eusebius has a pretty good explanation on why Jesus would be king of the Jews, because Jesus would be the Messiah, kind of like what this Jewish individual was saying in Israel, where the authority of kingship was separated between the ruler by Moses, by Aaron, who was going to be basically more or less their king, leader of the Jewish people, and the priesthood, the high priest. And you can trace the two lineages of authority in kingship and in priesthood, which was split from the original Messiah, Jesus, as in Jesus split it and gave that authority on earth, kind of like how you give a seal to a person, and this is the authority of the king. It's like saying, I give you my seal, and through this seal, you're speaking as if you are me, right? So he gave this seal or authority to two different branches and two different halves. And through Jesus, or in Jesus, those seals are combined and are reunited into him, and now he is king. So the way he talks about this is that King David gave his authority and his praise and to the Messiah, and he anointed him king, not with human hands, but through spiritual means, by anointing Jesus as the king. When he comes about, he has now been anointed king to be the king of the Jews. And the same thing with Melchizedek, who is a high priest, that Melchizedek honored and gave his authority back to the Messiah by placing spiritual hands and anointing that. And through Jesus, these two things are combined. And now Jesus is the Messiah with the authority of kingship and the high priesthood. And now Jesus can be king and high priest. And because he's king and high priest, he can do things that would probably disqualify him as the Messiah, such as, giving offerings where only priest classes could in the temple. A rather ingenious way of looking at it, but doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
You get this info. What book did you read that said this? Because this isn't, you didn't come up with this. You read this from somewhere. What did you read that told you this?
The Gospel of the Holy 12.
I can't find it.
Gospel of the Holy 12.
Another apocrypha text that was, kept out of the canonized Bible.
Got it. And that's what you learned from this?
Oh, yeah.
The issue of canon is a hotly debated one. Depending on what sect of Christianity you are, depending on what Bible you read, there's going to be more or less books in it, right? And depending on what Bible you read, they're going to use different versions of Hebrew. So, like, as a quick example of it, you've got the King James Version of the Bible, written in 1611, obviously by the request of King James. And in it, King James heavily was inspired by the Tyndale Bible, the very first translation of the Bible into English. And at the same time, you had Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformations happening. And essentially what's happening is that the Protestants did not agree with the Council of Trent. They finally canonized several books in the Bible, because before not all the books in the Bible that we have today were canonized, right? One of those being the book of Revelations. And what they did is they said, well, we canonized certain books. The Protestants disagreed with that. They said, well, no, these should be considered deuterocanonical, meaning that, they should be respected, wholly even, but not necessarily trusted. So the King James Bible kind of took both of them, right? If the book of Revelations is in the King James Version of the Bible, or in the Luther Bible it is in a different section. So the King James Version of the Bible has less books in it than the official Catholic Bible, or less books in it than the Greek Orthodox Bible, and the Greek Orthodox Bible's got less books in it than the Ethiopian Bible. So, books were taken out, books were put in. I've never heard. Having said, I've never heard once of the book he's referring to, and I can't find it anywhere because I've been looking.
Okay, so let me ask you. There's a lot of people that smart people, mathematicians, a lot of skeptics that are out there as well. How many people agree with what you have to say? How many people agree with this?
Well, I got 8 million people following my accounts across all platforms. I don't know.
So I'm not talking about that part. Of course, when you're talking with this level of firmness, there's a lot of that's why I'm curious. I'm curious to know how you come up with your beliefs.
Yeah.
But why is it, if that's what you believe in, more people don't believe in that? Why do you think such a small sect?
When you're born, you're given a name, a race, and a religion,
right,
and you spend the rest of your life defending a false identity. You don't know who you are. I don't know who I am. You were given your name. I was given my name. Who's Billy?
It kind of sounds like a personal issue.
Billy Carson. I didn't come up with that name. Somebody gave me that name. And then somebody said, get on your knees and pray before you go to bed. Say the Lord's Prayer before you go to bed. And so I got on my knees and I said the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, But then when you trace back that Lord's Prayer, whose prayer is that? That's the prayer of Ptah. Who's Ptah?
Okay, so I actually looked this up because I'm like, wait, what? I looked this up. I have no idea how he's getting this. I've looked it up. I'll put it on screen. It is nothing like the Lord's Prayer. And I'm trying to rack my brain about, why is it that they think that the Lord's Prayer and the prayer to Ptah are the same? And the only thing I can think of is that, O Father, and Father in Latin is pater. Maybe they are, and I could be wrong. Please tell me if I'm wrong, but they're referring to, I think that they're confusing pater or father to pata. and I think that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I really, really don't know how he's getting this. I don't know. I literally can't find anything about this. I've looked. I can't find it.
Ta Ea Enki from the Sumerian tablets. He wrote that prayer in ancient cuneiform, which then made it all the way into the Bible. And you think you're praying to God. You're saying...
Like I said, I can't find it. I've looked. I don't know. Okay. So Enki is the Sumerian god that is most associated with creating people. And the thing is that he did not create all people. You can read the Sumerian text, right? You can read the cuneiform in English. That's what I did. And it's very clear that they only claim to have created the black-headed, more specifically the black-haired people. And it more specifically than that, the black-haired people of Sumer. So they're only really referring to a very specific group of people with a very specific group of, identifiable things, the black hair. So you can't say that, well, Enki created all people because, he never claimed he did. And I don't know who this, I don't know. I'm about as confused as probably you guys are too.
And the prayer of Ptah. So we've been brainwashed. We've been programmed because for generations, we keep getting handed down this system where we're given this false creation of who we are, and we believe it wholeheartedly. We'll fight for it to the absolute death. People will die over those things that were given to them, not that they came up with on their own initially or originally. So it's a dangerous thing because we have a lot of people walking around that just took the programming code, and they don't even understand really who they are, what they're all about. That's why so many people don't walk in their passion. So many people don't even know what their passion is because they've been given and told what their passion is going to be, and they have no clue how to find out who they really truly are or what they would love to be involved in or what their passion truly is. So we have a lot of NPCs walking around, non-players out here just walking around, have no clue, just programs in the matrix. But then you have a few of us that have discovered who we are, that are working on trying to go to inner space instead of outer space, dig deep within ourselves, learn how to walk in our power, find out what our passion is, maximize that, and access that power and spread that power throughout the world.
Would you say your parents were Christians?
They were quasi-Christians. So they didn't go to church, but my dad would make me do book reports on the Bible from the time I was a little kid. My mother would make me say the prayers, So that in that way, they were Christians.
When did you stop?
I stopped probably, I say, maybe around 12 or 13. I realized something was too much. There was too much contradiction in the text. Because remember, I'm doing book reports on the biblical text. I wanted to see maybe if there was something that I missed. And again, later on in my life, in my late 20s, I said, it just doesn't make any sense. There's too many question marks. And every time you ask a question, they say, don't question God. Don't question the Lord. Blind faith. And I'm thinking, if I'm going to put all of my eternity into one book, if I'm saying this one book is going to lead me to eternity, and I don't know everything about it, every aspect about it, I can't question it, I can't dig deeper to get more knowledge out of it, then I think there's something wrong with that. I think there's something being hidden from me.
I'd actually agree with what he's saying, that you should always ask questions, you should always do more research, and you should always do what you can to better yourself, right? It's one thing being told something, it's another thing knowing why it is that it is. So I do encourage you to read, and I do encourage you to do your own research. I do encourage you to, prove Billy Carson or prove him wrong, prove me right, prove me wrong, because in the end, that only betters you and it only betters me. If I'm wrong, and you tell me what's something that's right, then I've now learned something. I've become a better person because of it. The same thing with you guys, right? It's a win-win situation. But having said that, I mean, all we can do is really look at what Billy is saying here. Compare it to what is being said, and you make up your own opinion or make up your own mind. Because after all, you are the master of your knowledge.